Oh, thank you, Mark, and thank you to ITSM UK for including me on today's agenda. Welcome, everyone. I'm going to be talking about the lessons I've learned from my time as a consultant prior to joining Axelos. A lot of my projects of the last couple of decades have been around tool implementations, going all the way back to Remedy 4.x, I think it was, in my early days. Of course, the last 10 years have seen explosion of ServiceNow type implementations, and I've even dabbled or advised some Jira implementations. And so here's some of the things that I've taken away, patterns of success as well as patterns of failure. So whilst the lessons themselves weren't rooted in ITIL 4, it's experience that I picked up before I started working on the ITIL 4 program. I've chosen to talk about the experience or the lesson, and then where possible link it to ITIL 4 in some way. And so hopefully you'll be able to understand those linkages and maybe share some of your lessons during the panel discussion or indeed in the chat. So before I get started, I mean, I know you can see me on video, but I always have this intro slide. I'm the product ambassador for ITIL, and apart from my love of everything IT service management, also a big comic book fan and a hard rock and heavy metal fan. So if anyone has questions about those, I'd be willing to take them on. That @Blowboy is my Twitter account, although I'm not terribly active on Twitter these days. But you can also search for Blowboy on LinkedIn, on Reddit, a couple other social media sites. And so chances are, if you see @Blowboy somewhere, it's going to be me. I sort of leap on the new and nascent social media networks and try to grab @Blowboy anywhere I can. So let's get started. Before we move into the lessons themselves, just a quick recap on some terms, which no doubt are familiar to the audience. I'll go through these very quickly. A service can be described in terms of VOCR. For those of you who are now scratching your head wondering what VOCR means, it stands for value, outcome, costs, and risks. So a service is a way of creating or co-creating or enabling co-creation of value by creating the outcomes that your customers want without those customers having to take on some certain specific costs and risks. There's always a balance. There will be certain costs and risks imposed, certain costs and risks taken away. And so value comes out of the recognition of more cost and risk, and outcomes or cost and risk being taken away and outcomes being created, rather than outcomes being destroyed or costs and risks being imposed. In the ITIL Foundation book, there's a very nice picture of a balance scale to sort of illustrate that concept. The other key thing to remember, and I think this is something that I've seen a growing recognition of since we launched ITIL 4, is that value itself is co-created, which means that, you know, to use the phrase, it takes two to tango. It may take more than two, but it's not something that's delivered. As a service provider or a provider of certain IT or non-IT services, you don't create those services and then say we've delivered value. Value is only realized when a user interacts with that provider or a customer interacts with that provider through transactions or series of transactions. We just heard about Luis talking about how he interacted with that with the trekking company. If the trekking company had simply created the service and published it on its website, it wouldn't have created value. It would have just taken on cost and risk. So value is co-created, but equally important is that value is subjective. So to take Luis's example, you know, he might have found a lot of value based on his experience as a customer of that trekking company. Perhaps one of the porters didn't, because they were carrying heavy loads on their heads up and down the mountain. So value is very subjective. It's still the same service, but how different stakeholders perceive value is different. So if we come to ESM implementations or ITSM implementations, for that matter, we need to focus on value, which is one of those guiding principles of ITIL 4. But that begs the question, whom are we creating value for? Maybe it's for the service desk team. Maybe it's for our users. Maybe the platform team are creating value for themselves in the things that they're learning about how the tools are being used. You can replace service desk with business unit. There may be a core group of people, and this is what we typically find making up a steering committee for a project, for example. But what I found is oftentimes on project teams, we fail to recognize that there may be other stakeholders in the mix who might not be part of that project board, who might not be part of the daily usage of the solutions that we're putting in place. But if we're not going to be creating value for them, or we're passing up on the opportunity to create value for them, we are creating additional enterprise level risks, which can threaten the success of the project. So some of those people might be your legal team. Are you complying with all the laws and policy? And if you're doing something across multiple nations or multiple territories, are you complying with all the local laws and regulations? What about your audit and internal audit and compliance team? Are you able to generate reports for them, or are they able to generate their own reports quickly and easily, so that you're reducing the amount of time it takes for your teams to respond to audit queries? What about finance and procurement? Are you helping them demonstrate their value to your organization by involving them with some of the negotiations of the contract, with the complying with their payment terms and conditions, using their preferred supplier list, unless there's a reason to deviate from that preferred supplier list? So again, if you look at groups like legal and finance and procurement, audit and compliance, they're not necessarily using that ITSM tool or that ESM tool on a day-to-day basis. But if you don't create value for them, you are effectively creating risks for them that will then have to be addressed down the line, and perhaps in a with much more resource-intensive way. The next lesson to think about is I've had a lot of success, and I've seen a lot of success where these tool implementations are managed as products, not just as projects. I realize it says not a project, which really say not just as a project. And to illustrate this, it's just a sketch that I did trying to show how resources will vary across time for some of these implementation projects. So typically, we ramp up a lot of resources. We're delivering the features, the functionality. We're developing them, we're testing them, technically testing, user testing, integration testing, all these good things. But then once we've passed that peak, we start to wind down the resources that are active on the project. Perhaps we don't need quite so many developers anymore. We don't maybe need quite so many testers anymore. Maybe we don't need quite so many project managers anymore, whatever it might be. But typically what I've seen is that that reduction goes all the way to zero, which means that the next time you want to implement a small improvement, a small tweak, maybe a new urgent request, you're having to ramp up your resources from nothing to actually having a small team in place to be able to deliver that request. So instead, what I've seen more and more organizations do, and I'm sure your organizations do this as well, if not, you should start thinking about doing this, is to create a small, stable product team who are working to continuously improve what's put in place, to iterate on what's already in place to improve the experience, improve the efficiency or the effectiveness, maybe work on some small feature requests, small fixes, and so on. What this means is that when you do need to create your next big project, you're working with a stable product team, and you're merely flexing resources up and down from that stable team level. So you're able to combine a stable product team with a flexible project team. And that way you ensure continuity and continuity of knowledge. You ensure that you're able to put in place continual improvement initiatives, and you're able to execute on those continual improvement initiatives without having to stand up big business cases every single time you're trying to invest. But we can go one step further. And if we talk about the continual improvement model and the use of small, stable product teams, using the continual improvement model to iteratively introduce small incremental improvements and collecting and using the feedback to guide their future direction, then you can start thinking about minimum viable product and minimum marketable product. For those of you who are not familiar with the terms, MVP, minimum viable product, is the smallest set of features that the product team can use to learn or obtain information or learning about how that product or that feature will be used. whereas minimum marketable product is the minimum set of features that customers or users will accept and start to use. So there's a difference between saying we want to learn how our users are going to interact with this mock-up of a website versus the website needs to be able to allow users to select from a catalog, put in their credit card details, fill in their address and have shipping details presented to them, etc., etc. So there's a difference between MVP and MMP. You may find variations on the theme of MMP. Most recently, I've seen some people call it MLP, minimum lovable product. So there are some variations to the term, but the spirit or the intention is similar. But recognizing the difference between MVP and MMP means that over time, you can start to tinker around. If you're starting a greenfield implementation or you're moving to a completely new tool, you can take a little bit of time to tinker around either through prototyping, capturing screens or mocking up screens to see how users will respond to those screens in the tool set, etc. And you're able to quickly iterate and refine those prototypes and mock-ups up to a point where you've developed enough that you can actually launch the tool. And the point at which you can launch the tool is at that point, it would be MMP. But applying product thinking beyond the launch allows you to track how much those features are being used and at what point the benefit of that particular feature is no longer providing benefit back into the organization. And at this point, you as a product team can start having discussions about whether it's time to end of life that particular feature or feature set and what you might in turn replace it with, or indeed if the need has entirely gone away. And doing so will allow you to use that stable product team to continually refine the tool set, the features that are live on it, how it's being used by the organization. It'll help you improve the return on investment that you've put into the tool set, and because you're turning off things that are just not being used anymore, and so on. So you can adopt this product lifecycle to be able to, and product team to manage the whole platform as its own product. Moving swiftly on, invest in marketing and communication. Now, this should be a no-brainer, but I have been part of so many projects and so many programs where the product team, the developers, the testers, have to essentially sit down and write copy or develop training materials and try to figure out how to attract users to and incentivize users to use the work, the platform, the products that they invested so much time and effort in, rather than bringing in somebody who, even if it's for a part-time basis, who sort of allows the team to craft compelling messages, compelling stories that will attract users by telling them how it will solve their problems. I've been part of too many projects where the outputs that we created were essentially a list of technical features rather than describing how those features helped the practitioners, the user community, solve their day-to-day challenges and remove their day-to-day toil. So we're all familiar with this paradigm where the platform team is just pushing emails, typically, or Word documents, or whatever it might be, to those users. But in a modern workplace, we've got several different outlets: email, chat functionality, portals, apps on your phones, and so on. So utilize multiple channels of marketing and communication to reinforce that message. All too often, we just stick stuff on a document, it's on a SharePoint or a shared folder somewhere, and we say that the communication is done. If you look at ITIL Practitioner way back in the day, it has a lot of really good information about the principles of communication. And I believe a lot of those found their way into Create, Deliver, Support, as well as Direct, Plan, and Improve, if I'm not mistaken. But moving on, one of the ways in which you can improve the marketing and communication is by cultivating super users and local champions. So go to, if you're rolling out a solution across multiple teams or even multiple territories, go to each of those teams, each of those territories, and ask them if they can find someone who will not only help shape the vision of the product that you're developing, but who will also then be able to help you communicate more effectively with the stakeholder groups or the user groups you're trying to reach. Those super users can act as a really great feedback loop, so they can feed back information about places or instances where users are struggling to use the tool, so you can quickly fix any issues that may be occurring by having that sort of sensor network, if you will. But the other reason why I talk about cultivating these super users and champions is that they can help contextualize the message as well. The way in which your facilities team might be talking about or describing incidents would be different from how your service desk might be describing incidents, which might be different from how your engineering team are describing incidents. So they might be using similar workflows on a common platform. They may be using different workflows. But when you're trying to communicate with these different stakeholder groups, you need to make sure that you're using the appropriate language, the appropriate tone, the appropriate stories or narratives that will help them see the value in the tool set that you're deploying. So cultivating super users and champions will help you contextualize the message to the department or the segments of or the user segments that you're trying to reach. And this is one way in which I've seen a lot of projects actually succeed in communicating with their users. So I've talked a lot about some of the things that I've seen that do work. I'm now going to quickly flip the script and talk about some of the things that I've seen have consistently not worked. So the first one is don't get gas. This is an acronym that was introduced to me not too long ago by a photographer friend who talked about how with many photographers, they just want to have the best cameras, the best lenses, the best lighting equipment, the best whatever. They have what's called GAS, or gear acquisition syndrome. They're chasing the tool because or the shiny tools because they believe that the shinier the tool, the better their photographs will be. And I've seen a very similar thing in ITSM projects that I've been on, where people want to have the latest and greatest platform or the latest and greatest or cutting edge integration with a piece of hardware that's deployed out in the field, whatever it might be, when a simpler solution could have worked. I've seen a lot of IT projects stumble or indeed fail because they get gear acquisition syndrome. So please do not get gear acquisition syndrome. Pick the simplest solution that will help you and all the other stakeholders meet the outcomes you're trying to get to. The second one is understanding or teams failing to understand that there are multiple touch points in the customer journey. Now, Luis just talked about the customer journey in great depth and with a really good non-IT example. So I'm not going to describe again what the customer journey is, but as Luis mentioned, there are multiple touch points along that customer journey. And those touch points with your customers or with your users lead to happy feelings or sad feelings or angry feelings nonetheless. And across those multiple touch points, you need to monitor and evaluate how your stakeholders are feeling so that you can improve the co-creation of value with them. And this leads to a few other lessons off the back of this recognition. The first is, don't rely on a document on SharePoint, which I already mentioned, to communicate with your users. Users need to be able to find the information when they're being onboarded, for example, to use the solution that you're putting in place. When they're facing a problem or they're trying to figure out, well, I remember this being covered in the initial training, but how do I exactly do this thing again? Don't rely on a document on SharePoint. Make it easy for your users to find the thing they're trying to get to, or to accomplish the task that they're trying to accomplish the outcome that they're trying to get to. So don't rely on document on SharePoint. Instead, why not invest in multiple user training formats? You know, whether that's lunch and learn, brown bag sessions. Of course, there's always a need for that document on a SharePoint. Some people just want to read it and follow the instructions. There may be a benefit to creating small videos that say, hey, did you know you can quickly submit a ticket to get a password reset automatically done? Here's how you do it. And you show it in a video. Maybe you want to have one-to-one communication with certain users who are like, for example, a PA or an admin who's responsible for multiple people. But invest in multiple channels because that will just increase the reach and it'll increase the user satisfaction and the traction ultimately that your platforms are seeing. But just remember that regardless of which channel or platform you're using to communicate, that you're constantly reiterating and reinforcing the same message. It makes no sense to say these types of tickets will be priority 5 in the Word document, and then in the video say these types of tickets will have the utmost attention and we'll try to get it resolved as quickly as possible, right? The two messages do not gel. Make sure you're reiterating and reinforcing message regardless of which medium you're choosing to communicate through. The next one, again, on the thing about touch points along a customer journey, is to not remove human cognition and empathy, which is a funny thing to say because we're talking about tool implementations here. But at the same time, we need to understand that good communication success of any tool implementation projects relies on empathy, not just empathy for what our users are trying to do, but our users' empathy of the constraints that we might be facing as part of that project team. But we also need to make sure we build in the safety valves, if you will, so that if the automation is not able to tackle a particular request or an incident, that we're able to route it to human beings as quickly as possible so that they can figure out how to resolve the situation. A really good book that talks in much more detail about that safety valve approach is Rob England's Standard Plus Case, and I highly recommend it to people. It's a wonderful piece of work. But what you see on the screen in front of you is what's called the empathy map canvas, and I provided a link at the bottom of the slide to a Medium article which explains how to use the empathy map canvas. It is sadly not something that's published in an ITIL book, although perhaps in a future iteration there may be a way in which we can introduce this concept. But the empathy map canvas, similar to the business model canvas or the operating model canvas, allows organizations to articulate various aspects of that communication. What are they saying? What are they seeing? What are they doing? You can do this from a user's point of view as well as from your own team's point of view. And if you were to actually mirror this exercise, then you can say that by talking about empathy from both sides of that communication network, you're able to encourage and incentivize better communication. So when you as a project team or a service desk team are saying, what am I saying to my users when I type this in or I provide this sort of an update through the tool, then what is my customer hearing? But equally, go to the customer's perspective and say, well, what are they trying to tell me? And how am I interpreting what they're trying to tell me? You could, as a service desk agent or as a project team, listening to your stakeholders, you could ask yourself, well, what is the steering group trying to tell me? What is my pilot group trying to tell me? But equally, flip the script and ask yourself, what do they think they're saying to me? Again, having an appreciation of both sides of that conversation encourages better empathy, it encourages better communication. What am I doing versus what am I experiencing is another really good question to be asking yourselves. And again, going back to that point of empathy and those customer touch points, the other key thing that I've seen leading to a lot of anguish and bad mojo, effectively, is teams turning off other channels of communication. So your user population might be used to communicating with a service desk through text messages or an app on their phone or through email or through a chatbot. And suddenly you've got this wonderful new self-service portal. And I've seen a lot of teams who then just turn off emails to the service desk, which leads to a lot of disruption, a lot of confusion. And frankly, a lot of that is not needed. I remember when we were first launching ITIL 4 being asked, will ITIL 4 help me turn off emails to the service desk? And I said, well, why would you want to do that? We are service providers in a way. We are in service to our users. We need to go where the customers are, not trying to force them to come to where we are. In other words, don't turn off those channels of communication. You can disincentivize those channels of communication. So you can say, Well, if it comes in through the self-service portal, we'll respond to it within 1 business day. But if you send it to us by email, it'll probably take 3 business days. So you can create a system of incentives and disincentives to encourage the behavior, but please, for the love of God, don't turn off other channels of communication. And by managing all the things I've talked about, empathy map canvas, the channels of communication, where users go to seek information, you can then alter and influence the perception they have of your service, because remember, value is subjective. It is based on the perception of your stakeholders, and you want to encourage them to think as positively as they can rather than as negatively about your service or the teams that are providing that service. So to wrap up, and I apologize if I'm running slightly over, but to wrap up, focus on value from multiple stakeholders, not just the people who are interacting with your tool on a day-to-day basis. Manage products and projects. Balance minimum viable against minimum marketable. Invest in marketing and communications. And this is not just for tool implementation projects. I would say this is for IT, this particular point. IT has a big marketing and comms challenge, where the people that the organization loves to hate. There's a quote from Julius Caesar, which I've used in other presentations. Mark Antony in his funeral speech says, I come not to praise Caesar, but to bury him. The evil that men do lives on after them. The good is oft interred with their bones. And how many times have we encountered situations where a senior VP is always complaining about how bad IT is based on an experience from 5 years ago? They don't remember all the good things we've done since then. So IT in general has a marketing and communications problem. So remember to make sure you invest in marketing and communications. Don't get gear acquisition syndrome. Try to find the simplest solution that will satisfy the needs of all parties. Invest in multiple training formats or multiple channels of communication to make that more general. Make sure you, in a way, retain human cognition and empathy into whatever solutions you're building. And don't abruptly turn off old ways of working. Incentivize and disincentivize the different ways of working. You may get to a point where you can gradually turn off older ways of working, but don't abruptly do that. If you have a service management story that resonates with some of the stuff you've heard today, please do get in touch. We'd love to publish a blog post or maybe even a case study based on your experiences. And you can always email us at commissioning@axelos.com, or you can find myself or Luis or Roman or any of the speakers here today on various social media platforms. We'd love to co-publish with ITSMF UK as well to promote the value that ITSMF UK is bringing to its members. If you're looking for more information about some of the things I've talked about today, such as ITIL 4, those guiding principles, there's a link in the deck, which no doubt will be shared with you afterwards. And if you're looking to find out more about customer journey maps, then there's also another link to another part of the Axelos website, which talks a little bit more about Drive Stakeholder Value, which is the publication that delves very deep into the concept or the model of the customer journey map. So with that said, thank you for your time. Please do connect with me on Twitter or LinkedIn. But if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, please just send me a note that you attended this webinar, because I get way too many invitations with absolutely no explanation or context, and I reject each and every one of them. Mark, thank you again for the opportunity to present, and back to you.